Hello. There was no garlic in that lasagna at lunchtime for any of that, was there? Bloody hell. I'm about knocking myself out here. So anyway, I get to talk about the title, getting our shift together. And I'm going to do quite a lot of repeating of stuff you've heard today, but I'm going to do it in the context of actually this is what we are doing, and can you please help us by doing this as well? So please join in with us and keep going. Another thing I'm going to do, you'll see it threaded through this, is the impact of COVID on some of what we've been trying to do and continue to do. And obviously there's a spoiler alert, it was really shit. So I'll tell you that what we're trying to do to make it better. So this is it. This is the strategy in a nutshell. You've heard lots of snippets about this, and I don't expect you to be able to see this up the back because I'm going to break all this down and work our way through it. But effectively, we have a strategy. Jason spoke about that this morning. And he's right, strategy is a piece of paper, but actually it's how you implement that that's the important bit. And you heard from Michael about the Einstein formula of survival. So you take some of that science and you do some education and you implement it locally, and funnily enough, that should equal survival. And basically what we're trying to achieve by 2026 is this big box here, this equitable access to a system of care to increase neurologically intact survival, which is really important, to 15% of all worked arrests. And we're going to do that with all these other things that I'm going to briefly touch on and where you can help us. So, first thing we're going to achieve, or try to achieve, is we're going to increase bystander CPR to 85%. It's a lot. That's up there with this unsung hero of the world when it comes to bystander CPR, which is the Netherlands. They do this already right across their country. And no one ever talks about the Netherlands when it comes to this stuff, but they've done an absolutely awesome job. They've done an awesome job getting this. And I think there's tons going on. You've heard about it this morning already, okay? But I think it would be wrong of me at this point not to say, who would be a call handler? Call handlers are awesome, okay? They have the hardest job in the ambulance service, in my opinion. And high five to them spectacularly. Not least when they're doing jobs like this, okay? Stick most of us in the room at a horrible job so we can deal with it at that time and at that place. And it's significantly easier than what they're trying to do over a telephone right now because of all the complexities that you've heard today. So we've got lots of work going on in the background to understand that phone call, to look for opportunities to improve how we can recognise cardiac arrest. We're then trying to improve how we get more bystander CPR done. I'm going to come on to those two things in a little bit. But overall, it's so, when you arrive at the scene to do something, you get a bit of hope that it's going to work because there's actually CPR happening. Happy days. Still pretty soul destroying when that's not the case. So what we're doing, well, the first thing is we want 1 million people trained by the end of 2026, or the end of the strategy in 2026. And that's where we're at just now. This came off the Save a Life Scotland website yesterday. Okay, doing pretty good. And this is the public-facing part of our strategy. This is the Save a Life Scotland banner, that partnership, that movement, everyone involved trying to make things better. So the more people we train, the better, although there's lots of nuance there, which I'm going to touch on. And you might have heard about this today. Yeah. But it's massive. It has the opportunity to be huge. And I'm not going to say any more about it because you've heard loads and loads and loads about it. But, if your neighbour ran across the street and knocked on your door and said, oh my God, can you come and do chest compressions, would you? You probably would, wouldn't you? Let's be honest about it. Like Donald said, that's your neighbour running across the road so you can go and do chest compressions. That's what we're after. I think it's an awesome public health device as well, because I think I've been drunk more times I've been sober when I've had a good time on there, which makes me wonder what I've been up to. But anyway, that's inside. So, you might recognise this in the front row. What are one of the strategies to increase bystander CPR rates? Why are kids so important? Multiplier effect. You tell a kid what to do, they remember what to do. For a start, I remember what I was told by Colin Baxter when I was 9 years old in Duns Primary School. True story. So they remember it. I don't remember what I did yesterday. Well, I do. I put this presentation together. But they go home and they tell other people about it. And that's why kids are so important. It's a multiplier effect to what they can tell. They give information to people. And they find this exciting. So this is some of the work that Gillian and our team in Fife are doing. And this is their school's training kit. I look at it, it's fun, but it's educational. And they can give them the tools to say, look, this is how you call for help. This is what to do. And this is how you do CPR. And they might not be big enough to do CPR, but they can tell other people how to do CPR. And this is how we'd use a defib. Don't be scared of it. It's awesome. You just press the button if it tells you to, and it won't hurt anyone. You know, it's doing the job it's meant to do. So that's why kids are important to this. Achieving this 85%, it's huge. But then the other thing you've heard about, and I'm going to talk about this in a couple of terms. But first, I'm just going to use Dundee as this example and say how it's a problem in real time. So the relationship between 7D, so Scottish Index of Multiple Deprivation Score, 7D1 being really deprived, 7D5 being really affluent, okay? So the redder the map is, the more deprived the area. So anyone who knows Dundee may recognise this. And then the bottom map is the postcode density of the cardiac arrest happening. Doesn't take a genius, does it? Okay. The big issue and the bit that's not really been spoken about today, see all these cardiac arrests? These are our 50-year-old males going into VF. And they're our service industry workforce. That's your bin men, that's cleaners, that's joiners, electricians, that's people who've still got a massive life in front of them who are having VF arrests in those areas in deprived Scotland. Okay, so that's an important point. And it's an important point because this is also a problem. So if you look at the number of cardiac arrests in the blue graph, it's a couple of years old, this graph now, but it's still true. Much more likely to have a cardiac arrest in those deprived areas, much less likely to have access to a pad. You see this, you can't you? When they're 50-year-old having VF arrests who work in our service industry. It's not great. And that's why another aim of the strategy is to make sure 20% of all cardiac arrests will have a defibrillator applied before the arrival of the ambulance service. We signpost more defibrillators in this percentage-wise now, but they're not applied. So who's been a cardiac arrest and there's been a pad there and it's not been on the patient? A few hands going up. It's pretty depressing, isn't it? Especially when you put your pads on and they're in VF and you know it's taking you 5 or 6 minutes to get there. You think, patient could have been chatting by the time we've arrived, potentially. So, and again, a lot of this comes back to the system in the background. So again, you've heard about the work, so I'm not going to go over it, but you know, what can you do to help for both of these things? I guess that's the important bit. So, if you know there's pads in your area, you can get them registered, because if we don't know they're there, we can't signpost them to people. So someone needs to register those defibs. The Guardian needs to register them so that our call handlers can say to someone, there's a defib on the front of the butcher shop on the high street, which is 50 yards up the road. Can you go and get it? So, it's a really complicated graph, except it's not when I explain it. Okay, this is each of the SIMD quintiles. Okay, one really deprived. Proportion of defibs covered by, proportion of OHCAs covered by defibs. It's tiny, isn't it? That's the existing one, the blue line. Okay, you know, it's a percentage-wise, even with the work that goes on, it's not a huge number. Okay, if you increased those number of defibs by 100% and optimized them as either location, that's what you'd get it up to. Or if you just took the defibs and optimized their location, that's where you would get it up to with existing resources that are already there. So you've heard about PadMap before. That's what it's all about. Okay, it's about trying to say, where do the arrests happen and where should they go? Because actually the arrests generally don't happen outside the fruit shop in Musselburgh High Street. They happen in the housing estate that's out with 500 metres from the fruit shop on Musselburgh High Street, within the more deprived parts of town where the defib may be more likely to work because the person's in a shockable rhythm. So there's lots of people who get involved here, and there's probably some local authority solutions, because, you know, defibs are quite difficult to put in housing estates sometimes because they don't have a handy electricity supply. But they do have things like lampposts, and they've got an electricity supply. And some local authorities, Dundee would be an example, who are really forward-thinking when it comes to this. And they're saying, look, let's find the deprived areas, let's find the lampposts, and let's try and put a defib there, right in the heart of the housing estate. Let's work with the builders when they're putting a new housing estate and then try and get some defibs in there as part of that solution, so it's already there. You know, will we get to points where we have defibs in the home? The way the technology is going? Very possibly. And lastly, how we present them is important, because often we can't get them. You know, I get it. People lock their defibs away, and if they're registered with us, we have the code. But sometimes, by the time the person gets that defib, they have to phone 999 again, and it's challenging. So the defib, even when it's there, has to be accessible. And that's why not all pads are in cabinets. Okay, we need to find other ways to get defibs to people, particularly, can't see if they're still here. There was lots of questions from over here earlier about rural areas, and this is one of those answers to the questions. How do we get defibs to folk? So our cardiac responders, our first responders, are two really important groups in this space who can go further and take the defib to the person, along with banging CPR, because they practice it all the time. And actually, the onus is on us to find exciting solutions as well. We've got quite an exciting thing on the horizon, potentially, with a well-known company who may be able to start getting to people with defibs, but that's all I can say about it just now. It's a bit frustrating. I'm dying to get myself into trouble here, but I'm not going to. Nah. What does it all mean? What does it all mean so far? I don't have loads of data in this, all right? But there's a couple of things that I think are important. Pre-strategy, 40% bystander CPR rates. Decent climb, 67%. But if you look at SIMD1 and SIMD5, actually it's much improved picture. Okay, bystander CPR rates are getting better. Big up, Save a Life Scotland. Targeting deprived areas, targeting sport. Can't do anything in Scotland without sport being involved. Okay, please for them. And what can you do? Well, you can help. If you can be, bothered to give up a bit of your free time, and I know it's difficult because we're all stretched, actually find these events that are happening and give up an hour and help do some of that CPR awareness training, because it makes a massive difference. It gives people confidence to do CPR on someone they love. And that's all we're trying to achieve here. And I think for me, this is one exciting one. So the amount of times that publicly available defibs have been applied to someone's chest before we got there, you can see it starting to improve. Okay, it's still 10%, but it's better than hee-haw percent a decade ago. Yeah, much better. This is all in published data, by the way. You're getting a little sneak preview in the next OHCA reports. I did ask Gareth. We're one of the few places internationally now that are taking this seriously. So who's got their cards? Have you all been to the chest, heart and stroke? Scotland stand? Good. Most people in this room go to cardiac arrests. We all want you to have these. And I know you've got a shit ton of stuff to do when you're there. But there's tons of research that says if you just turn to bystanders and say, thank you, you've done a great job, makes a massive difference to how they do. But it's still a really traumatic thing they've witnessed. So if you can give them this card, they can phone this number and they can get some help when they need it. And it may just be a chat, as Amanda said earlier. Actually, it may be more. So 1st of November is the official go-live date for that. Lots more comms about to start coming out. Cards are about to deliver to stations. It's all going to be there for you to keep them in your pocket and hand them out to bystanders. And it's bystanders that have done CPR or witnessed CPR, and give them support. And here comes the shorty rant. We'll address the challenge of timely communication of anticipated care plans and decisions for frontline crews. You were here in 2016? Remember the chat in 2016? So, you don't have to resuscitate everyone that's dying. Tons has happened since then. GRCALP guidelines are totally transformed now in terms of futility and not starting CPR. Clarified that the whole 15 minutes without CPR doesn't mean that 15 minutes before you get there. If you walk through the door and CPR's going by a bystander who's in a state of distress, it doesn't mean you have to continue, because the patient hasn't been seen for 3 hours, so they're still dead. Okay? Our confirmation of death guidelines have changed. The chief nursing officer's guidelines have changed. Tons has changed. Do you know what's not changed? The number of people we resuscitate every year in Scotland. It's exactly the same now as it was 2016. Put your hand up if you've been in the living room and you've all been looking at each other with that look that says, we shouldn't be doing this. Good, everyone's hands have gone up. Don't need to, it's futile, yeah? So go and remind yourself of those guidelines. That can make a massive difference. But big up the Macmillan Partnership project that's launched now as well. Awesome work, okay? I know you're all seeing this. You don't need me to tell you loads about this, but not least giving ambulance clinicians confidence in dealing with palliative and end-of-life care patients, which are really difficult, challenging patients to look after, but also help you with confidence with decision-making in the heat of the moment. Because the sad reality of it is there is still an issue where the first point of anticipated care planning that happens for a patient with life-limiting illness happens when we arrive in the room as an ambulance service. So we end up taking the burden. And lastly, we're going to use data to understand and address the variation. Jim's spoken about that. It's important. We don't know what's happening, we can't fix it, we don't know where to target it. And there's been examples throughout the day threading through this whole thing. And use some exciting innovation. There's Louise's ambulance, our ECMO ambulance. And I'm sure you've all looked at the drone, largely because you couldn't miss it when you came round the corner. It was massive. Are drones the answer to it? Who knows? You know, are drones going to be flying over Scotland in the next year delivering that defibs? No, because the Civil Aviation Authority won't let them do that. Okay? But what we can do is replicate some of James's work he was speaking about earlier. Say, well, actually, how will people interact with a drone? You don't mind getting a defib off it and going and using it. Well, they actually go near the thing to get the defib. And that's where we're at with the research on this. That far back in that chain of potential innovation that will help. And lastly, I think we need to take a look at ourselves a bit and stick with me on this. So, death of a canary. The idiom. We were doing really well just before the pandemic. 60 survivors per million. That's the gate that gets pushed open for the global resuscitation of ICUs are awesome. Come and be our friends. Okay? And we'd opened the gate brilliantly. And then that pandemic came along. And we bucked one trend. Everywhere else in the world reported a significant reduction in bystander CPR rates during the pandemic. We didn't. It didn't budge. In fact, if anything, it increased. And that's credit to the Save a Life Scotland partnership, who'd laid the foundations to make sure that amazing work kept going. Okay, but all our figures did that. Look at survival. It dropped to the same survival rates we had before we had strategies and before we did any improvement work. Literally overnight. It was soul destroying. And I think why it's the death of a canary is because it's improved again, you know, but it's a health problem that's made a health problem keep being a bit worse. We've not really fully recovered from it. We've done some good recovery and we've done some improvement in a lot of places, but we're still struggling to see that 30-day survival nudging back over that 10%, let alone getting towards the 15%. And it's caused a lot of reflection. And when I say it's caused a lot of reflection, I mean by me, by Gareth, by Dave, by Donald particularly, say what's the extra bit that we're still missing? So, 10 years ago, you probably all saw this slide when a young Gareth Clegg with a wee bit of hair behind his ear still and all that kind of stuff was going around ambulance stations telling you about this triangle of survival, education, audit and feedback, leadership. It's audit basics, clever stuff. And this has been what our reflections brought us to. We've done some amazing things, but there's still a big chunk of it missing. And it's the stuff we did a decade ago that started all this work up. Okay. If you look at Seattle and Ambulance Victoria and Scandinavia and Lugano and all the really awesome places around the world that get amazing survival rates consistently, ours are good, but they're not as good as theirs. There's a bit that they do that we still don't, and that's that whole skills and drills of high-performance CPR training and quality assuring what we're doing through using defib downloads on a regular basis. And I think that reflection has, for us, has led to this is probably the bit that's missing just now. So that's for us to come up with a solution to. And it's all about creating a culture of excellence, the bit that you want to be happening. So if you create a movement and take that whole systems approach to save a life, that's what happens. It's not about the ultimate number at the top. It's about everything you're doing that to improve the quality, and that's what looks after that number at the top. That's what looks after that survival rate, and that's what pushes it to 15%. So it's an old one, but it's a good one. What we ask you to do more than anything is keep saving lives, keep having fun, lots of practice, lots of chat, lots of ideas that we want to help, and above all, keep being awesome. Thanks for your time.